So taking that same chip, it's called an RFID chip, putting it into stuff or having somebody else put that into stuff for you, then with a very unobtrusive, inconspicuous reading device buried into that person's cane, the person can be alerted to what that object is that they're nearby. So microphone, podium, for example. Work that's coming out of a researcher in Carnegie Mellon is doing something sort of like that, but as an aid for shopping. And again, remember, shopping is one of those IADLs. Another idea of this attendant market. So we've been piloting this with a local large supermarket chain. And they're interested in providing it to people who are fully sighted. Why? Because when you give this customer the opportunity to get more information about a product, you can tell them all sorts of other things. You can push content. You can push, today's special is whatever. You might be interested in something else. You might like to know the nutritional value of this stuff without having to read it. So all sorts of other reasons why these technologies make sense, and not just for people that have an impairment. Something that we've been looking at also is how to make sense of somebody's world, but from their viewpoint. We call this first-person vision. I'm the first person, and I'm looking out at you, and I can see what's going on. This was motivated partly, admittedly, technology push. We do that, sorry. But also from some anecdotal information. Everyone knows about the big brother attitude amongst seniors. They don't like to be watched with cameras. Well, that's not exactly quite true, and I'll tell you more about that towards the end of the presentation. But we found that some would be willing to have a camera capture what they are seeing, even though they would not like to be seen by the camera. So an interesting idea. So a couple things you can do with that. One, for example, is identify, again, for somebody with a visual impairment, different things around the house. Identify foodstuffs, distinguish one from another. The thing that makes this interesting and the thing that makes this fun and makes it hard is doing this in somebody's natural living environment. So you don't find, all the early work in making these ways of identifying things, everything's in a nice, neat row, in a nice, organized fashion. Well, guess what? My house isn't like that. I bet your house isn't like that either, right? Everything comes in different fashions and different places, upside down, inside out. Here's one I think is also very cool. Looking at faces, and this is also an old technology, being able to identify that's a face, and how cool would it be for me to be able to look out and next time I see you a year from now, when I don't remember your name, have something whisper in my ear and say, oh, that's Christine. You met her at CES during your keynote talk. How many would not want to have a technology like that for themselves? Would not. Right. Okay, so again, you don't want it? Okay, fine. Everybody else does, so we got a good market. The point is that that's another attendant adjacent market for technology that would have very great utility for seniors, but a lot of utility for a lot of others. Here's the stuff that really turns us on, robotics. And I want to give you the disclaimer. See that 8x in the bottom right hand? Okay, so that means that what you're seeing really takes 8 times longer to really occur. What's happened here is a person has used a laser to point at something that fell on the floor and say, please go get that for me. And once the laser's been on there and the robot says, I see it, it can figure out the rest. And then she uses the laser to say, here, put it in my left hand. Very easy to use interface for somebody that has a disability. The nice thing about that also is the robot doesn't have to be nearly as smart to figure out where things are because the person tells them. And that's one of the things we think is crucial to all this sort of technology, keeping the person in the loop. You've got a smart mind, smarter than the robot, smarter even than this robot. This is one of my robots. This is a project we're doing with Intel, and this is actually happening as fast as it really does. Taking that same technology, they can identify things around the kitchen, being able to pick them up and move them around. One of the goals here is to prepare a meal. And probably before this year is out, we'll be able to do something simple. Certainly we can do something in a microwave, but do something a little bit more involved like that. Making a sandwich is one of our brass rings. Different type of robot, also out of our shop. This is work that's being led primarily at the University of Pittsburgh, which is our key partner. And what's interesting about this, you see the 2 panels of video on the top. That's a person who is controlling the robot arm that you see on the bottom. And he's doing that on behalf of that person who uses this wheelchair. Those arms are mounted on the side of a wheelchair. And it's not a new concept from a technological standpoint, but it is a new concept from a social standpoint, in that somebody could help a person with a disability who uses a wheelchair and needs some other assistance, needs help with manipulation, could help that person do something like make lunch from their desk. So I could imagine doing this to help my parents. Fortunately, they don't use wheelchairs yet, but I could be at work and help them make lunch from my desk without ever getting up. We're thinking about a paradigm also where people that have disabilities would be remote operators, sort of a super call center, not just getting advice, but getting assistance from a distance. They would be helping other people with disabilities. A lot of work that is going on in academia, and this is where I think that there's going to be strong partnerships and should be stronger partnerships between industry and academia, is explorations that go beyond the technology. So this is a project that's based on technology happening at the University of Miami in the CREATE Center. The technology itself, videophone, is not anything new. The idea of using it, though, to provide support to a population of informal caregivers is a new idea. And particularly what they're exploring here is how acceptable is this population. Now notice that I emphasized it's a low SES group, which usually correlates with their not being so savvy with technology as the general population. And yet this exploration has borne out the idea that yes, they can make great use of this. It's not hard for them to master the technology. They really like it, and it's being effective. And those explorations matter at least as much. So here's a technologist, here's a robotics guy telling you that social science might matter more than technology development at a CES show. And I am telling you that. So here's a few other things that, to think about, things that are coming down the pike. Doing a really effective job of detecting falls. And there's technology here, you've probably seen it. But guess what? People will forget to put the things on that you need to have on. How do you make it foolproof? How do you make the house know that somebody fell without somebody having to even think about technology on their own? Medication adherence, same deal. There's great ways to remind, there's great ways to dispense, and at the end of the day, if somebody wants to intentionally spoof that I took a pill, they can do it. They can succeed. All those robots and all the other ones that are being developed, good, effective ways for us to interact with them. I can interact with a robot. I build robots. Most of you probably don't have as much chance as making a robot be friendly to you as I do. And that's not right. And it's got to be at least as easy for the general population to use as it is for me, if it's really going to sell. Everyone's looking for the killer application. Vacuuming, that's a good one. That wasn't the killer. It wasn't. You know, my wife tells me that laundry is the killer app, and I think she might be right. Folding clothes and putting them away. Tossing them into the washing machine, that's easy. I could do a robot to do that right now. Folding them and putting them away. But there's a lot of things, and everyone's looking, and there may not be a killer app. There really might not be, because everybody's got different priorities. That idea of the remote assistance that I spoke of, can you make money on it? I don't know. Can you make it something that would be very interesting for a direct-to-consumer like me to help my parents? Probably, but I'm not sure. And then all that business of monitoring and measuring activity. There's one thing that's great about being a person. You're different than everybody else in this room. And you do everything a little bit differently than everybody else in this room. Now, the flip side of that is, fortunately, you do things in a very predictable way. So once you start doing things and a computer system is trained to understand how you have breakfast and what your daily pattern of activity is like, guess what? It's actually going to work, because you're going to stick to that much more closely than you think. And then things like working, I am shocked that they are putting video systems on dashboards now. I mean, the last thing we need is a little bit more distraction. But different things are coming. So I talked about privacy, and I want to point out a few things. This is work that's coming out of Rich Schultz's group. He had